the problem with Lehman was, frankly, accounting fraud. And I don't know why more people are not using the word fraud. The fact that when they went under, most people thought that they had maybe a $10 billion hole in their balance sheet. You know, that there were several different deals they were looking at the time. They were looking at, you know, getting money from the Koreans. They were looking at selling their big asset management business. Everybody figured that if they got $6 to $10 billion, they might not survive long term, but at least they kicked the can down the road a couple quarters, and who knows, the environment might change. You know, you always have more options if you can keep the game going. So the sense on and the way the credit default swaps were trading at the time reflected a sense that obviously there was a hole, but there wasn't, you know, a gargantuan hole. And then when the firm went under, you know, the unsecured debtors lost over $100 million on an, sorry, over $100 billion. The unsecured creditors lost collectively over $100 billion to the extent they weren't protected by credit default swaps on a $660 billion balance sheet. How do you have, I have a great deal of trouble believing that their positions were that badly marked that they could possibly have losses that big in any kind of honest accounting. You couldn't possibly have that huge a decay between their last quarter end and when they went down. It's just not plausible.
Well, what people have said to me was that their liquidation occurred under, you know, panic-stricken conditions when the world credit markets had frozen up and they couldn't get much for anything because nobody could get much for anything.
I would have to check, but their unsecured credit was, because of that 660 balance sheet, most of that was secured credit. Most of that was loans pledged against, like repos, very short-term loans pledged against very specific assets. Mm-hmm. So you have to pull a whole chunk of that out. So that $100 billion loss, I think, was roughly on 150 billion of liabilities. Mm-hmm. On a much, so for them to have that kind of a catastrophic loss in such a short period, again, it doesn't, to me, it just doesn't add up. And again, even when they went down, the CDS didn't reprice that quickly. Even when they were talking about the CDS settlement, people initially expected, so this is after they announced bankruptcy, but the settlement is still scheduled, people expected higher numbers than that. I mean, the belief was that the numbers would be higher. Nobody was expecting 8 cents on the dollar.
I see, okay. So you strongly suspect that there was accounting fraud?
Yeah, I mean, the positions were mismarked. I mean, we've seen that it hasn't gotten the attention it should have gotten, but we've seen that with Merrill Lynch. You know, that one, they had a position that was mismarked. There were other problems with the Merrill book deterioration, but there was a position that they had marked as being profitable to $100 million, that when Bank of America went in, it had to be remarked to a $900 million loss, and people who've looked at that have said that kind of a mismarking is not plausible. That this isn't just somebody was very asleep at the switch at a minimum, but that kind of a loss, there's a lack of proper controls, and that is fraud. You know, if you misreport on public documents, it's fraud. I mean, there's just no other way to put it.